All right, welcome back. Incidence of a tax. All right, so we're talking about this idea of the tax incidence. What that refers to is who is really paying the tax. And it doesn't mean who pays the tax to the government, like who writes the check. So we're talking about we have producers and we have consumers. And what the tax incidence is trying to figure out is who's more responsible for really paying this tax. Regardless of whether the tax is technically put on producers or technically put on consumers, what really matters to determine who's going to be the one most affected by this tax is the relative price elasticity of demand and price elasticity of supply. And so the next couple of slides will show exactly what that is. But again, as you copy the definitions here, just to reiterate what this is and why it's important, is that sometimes we might have the idea that if you want to tax producers, tax corporations or something like that, and that'll mean that they are paying the taxes. But that might not be true, because depending on the elasticities of supply and demand, they might or might not be able to pass on that tax to their consumers in the form of higher prices. So elasticity will tell us who really pays the tax. So when demand is more elastic than supply, the burden of an excise tax falls mainly on producers. So remember, we're doing an excise tax. That means a per unit tax. So each unit that's sold is being taxed at the same rate. And the idea here is that when demand is more elastic than supply, what that means is that consumers will change their behavior much more than suppliers in response to a price change. So the tax is going to raise the price. So if demand is very elastic and there's a price increase, consumers will greatly decrease the amount of that good that they are consuming. Meanwhile, since supply isn't as elastic, producers won't decrease the amount that they supply by as much. So we see a much bigger change here happening. And as you look on this model that's drawn for you, the amount of the tax, you can see the large rectangle, both the gray and the one with the squiggly lines, that's the entire area of the tax. The squiggly lines is the part of the tax that's being felt by consumers. That's the increase in the price to consumers and the quantity for each unit that they are purchasing, whereas the much bigger box there below is what the producers are paying. That's the price down below is what they are actually receiving in response, like after they pay the tax. So they're receiving a much lower price, and yet you see that their quantity didn't decrease by that much. On the other hand, when supply is more elastic than demand, the burden of an excise tax falls mainly on consumers. So this time it is suppliers who are changing their behavior more than consumers. So consumers, in other words, keep buying the same thing like they were before. So most of that tax incidence will fall on consumers. So they keep buying it even though the price has gone up. And you can see again, look at the price without the tax compared to the price with tax. It's gone up significantly for consumers. Down below, you see that the price received by producers has decreased as well. That's true, but it hasn't decreased by as much as the price has increased for consumers. So consumers are feeling more of the burden of that tax than producers are. Again, so you have it all summarized here. When demand is inelastic, that means consumers pay most of the tax. When supply is inelastic, producers pay most of the tax. So we have kind of easy ways to think about this. Whichever one is more inelastic is going to pay more of the tax because their behavior changes less. And you can see that with number 1 and number 4. You can see that with demand is inelastic, the price paid by consumers goes up dramatically and the quantity doesn't fall by much. Same thing with number 4, except reverse. Now it's for suppliers. The price falls, but they supply just about as much. Elastic demand and elastic supply, on the other hand, will lead to the other party paying more of the tax. So if demand is elastic, then producers will pay most of the tax. If supply is elastic, then consumers will pay most of the tax. Again, the important thing here is that some goods are better to be taxed than others because of the size of the deadweight loss. We will get to that in the next video. So stick with me for that. Till next time, this has been a La Money production.